Bioware have finally come to their senses. They've acknowledged that they themselves destroyed Dragon Age, Mass Effect, probably going to ruin that very soon as well, what's left of it. The entire company is a shell of its former self. Truth, honesty, self-reflection, it's genuinely great to see. Just kidding, they blamed everything on EA. Everything with the Veilguard, it's apparently all EA's fault. They did nothing wrong, they wanted to give us the best game possible, but EA just wouldn't let them. Couldn't be done. That's basically where they're at. You think that Bioware can't sink lower, and I thought that they'd be gone by now. I thought EA would finally just pull the plug. I don't know what's happening. I thought that would happen 10 years ago, but they just keep them going. I don't know if it's like the other teams at EA just want Bioware to still be there because it makes them look better. It's like if the team behind Apex Legends, Jedi Survivor makes a mistake, brings out a terrible PC port like with Jedi Survivor, they do a bad job. Well, at least we're not Bioware. We're not that bad. So EA, leave us alone. Don't shut us down. You've still got Bioware there, so we're gonna slip under the rug. Seems like that. I don't understand how Bioware can still exist. They haven't shipped anything of worth for over a decade, surely losing a lot of money. They operate in an expensive country. It's just weird, but even now they've still learned zero lessons. Blaming EA, it's all them, and they want to apparently do right by gamers, which I might have bought like 15 years ago, but we know now that yes, two things can be true at the same time. EA can be greedy, ruin a lot of games, bad direction, strategy, crap live service initiatives that just don't work, ruin franchises. Sure, that's all true, but Bioware are also woefully incompetent. And the buck does stop with EA. They should recognize that Bioware are useless and worthless. They haven't for whatever reason. I don't know what is going on, but Bioware still suck, and pointing the finger at anyone just looks like excuse making. There is an interview here. So Dragon Age Maestro says EA always spoke about a hypothetical nerd cave full of diehard RPG fans who would always show up so you didn't have to try and appeal to them. Now, this is probably true. Like, it's probably all true. We've probably felt this in other mediums, certainly games, movies, and TV as well, where all these franchises, whether it's Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Dragon Age, many other RPG franchises, where they develop it not for you, not for actual fans, because they think, oh, well, they'll just show up anyway, it's Lord of the Rings. Surely people are going to be down for that, even if we totally screw it up, insult the original books, we insult the Peter Jackson trilogy, turn away anyone who would have any possible interest. It doesn't matter. These people will show up anyway, and we'll bring in new fans, and we'll make way more money. Surely that's going to work. Even though it's been attempted 700 plus times in every medium, it never works. They end up just embarrassing themselves. They destroy even just the franchise for the future. They just totally taint it, which has certainly happened to Star Wars. I don't know how that's ever going to turn around. It's just all a big embarrassment. So I can believe that EA has wanted to attempt this as well. I just think it sounds like excuse making when you're saying this now, after it seems like you had a bit of freedom with the Veilguard, and you didn't use it wisely. You could have, at the very least, even if you were forced to go in an action combat direction, and maybe at one point in time you were forced to make it a live service and you didn't want to. Maybe at one point in time you were forced to make it a live service and then you were allowed to make it single player, so you made some changes. That stuff can all be true. Like, if it was a true to form Dragon Age in terms of story and tone and all of those things, but it was rough around the edges because they had to change what it was. It was a live service that was twisted into a single-player game. If that was the end result, I don't think it would have been clowned on nearly as much. People might have even said, hey, it is a little bit of a mess, this could have been better, but at least you're going in the right direction. This is better than Anthem and Mass Effect Andromeda and so on. That didn't happen. The biggest problems were not even the gameplay. No one really talks about the gameplay because it's just not memorable. The combat sucks, and there's nothing that interesting there. But really, people are most disappointed because it doesn't feel like a Dragon Age game. It feels like something else. It feels like activists in a room saw an opportunity to, hey, let's speak to Dragon Age fans and let's just go ahead and self-insert ourselves. Let's tell them about all our real-life problems, our weirdo problems. Because have you seen the team that work at Bioware? Oh, Kathy in the lunchroom telling us about all her non-binary related trauma. Let's put that in the game. Let's do that. Let's just fuck over the lore of Dragon Age, anyone actually interested in a fantasy game, to do all that instead. That's what they did. I do not believe that the EA head honchos sat the team at BioWare down and said, no. You want to make it like a fantasy RPG that's true to Origins. You've seen that Baldur's Gate 3 is doing really well, so you want to really capture that tune, an epic sword and sorcery fantasy. No. Scrap all that. We want the tone to be like modern Disney. A bit like a mobile phone game in terms of its visuals and so on. That's what we want. We think that's going to bring in more people. No one believes that anymore. The BioWare talent, if it ever existed, really, it's hard to know if they just got lucky one day in the old days or if there were good people there. Hard to say because the person whose interview we're going to go through, the Dragon Age maestro, he created Dragon Age, but he's totally lost his mind. This person is totally off the deep end. So I don't know how much talent was ever there, but it's pretty clear that the people at BioWare right now, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what gamers want, that's for sure. In fact, it may be worse than that. They may, some on a deep level, know what gamers want, but they hate their audience, they hate the average gamer and don't want to give them anything they want because they think doing that means you're acknowledging them and you're suggesting that their thought process is okay. And gamers are not okay. They're chuds. We've got to put a stop to them. So we're going to give them the exact opposite of what they want. And that's going to be it. And then when that makes no money, because no one wants that, because most gamers are just average people, common sense people, and they don't want this. That's why it failed. But apparently no. Apparently it's all EA. So this interview, Dragon Age veteran says EA like to refer to a cave where RPG fans who could be trusted to buy anything the genre threw at them would dwell. BioWare veteran David Gader explained that before he left BioWare, his tastes had become somewhat old-fashioned in EA's eyes. I was very vocal on the Dragon Age team, he says. I was always trying to push it to our traditional mechanics, and that wasn't very welcome in the EA sphere. I question that because Dragon Age Origins, I actually played it semi-recently. The combat's okay. I mean, it's like a watered-down version of the Dungeons & Dragons combat you'd find in Baldur's Gate. So kind of like Baldur's Gate 3, but not turn-based, different kind of system. But then Mass Effect is very action-focused. Even the first one, which is probably the most RPG, the last time I replayed it was that remaster, so the combat might have changed from what I remember, but they were already going in more of an action direction anyway. So I don't really buy that EA forced that upon them. I can't remember the exact year that EA bought them, but they were working on action combat related games before EA actually bought them. So it's not like they forced them to completely change directions. He says that EA considered those mechanics, the kind that shaped games like Dragon Age Origins, to be slow and cumbersome, rather than the actiony and slick presentation that the studio was being pushed towards. Now, this is what I mean with the excuse making, because Gator seems to be trying to excuse the failures of BioWare and blaming it all on EA, and at least right now he's referring to the combat-related mechanics. Again, even if the Veilguard had have been action-focused and they totally just made it an action RPG, most of the role-playing game DNA was basically gone, if the tone and the characters and the story was still on point, I think people would have forgiven them and would have thought, well, maybe in the future they'll go back, but at least they got the story and characters right. This feels like a Dragon Age game. They didn't do that. That's what people hated the most. This does not address that. But this guy will not acknowledge the truth because the fact is he shares all the same politics, the same views as the BioWare team. And every decision that they made on the Veilguard was politically motivated. All these little things that add up to a piece of crap, all politically motivated. So the whole look of the game, how it went from pretty cool, sort of Lord of the Rings-esque fantasy, big burly warriors, orcs, and everything about it just had that kind of tone that most male RPG gamers are looking for. That's really bad, apparently. That's evil, that's toxic, so that had to be shifted to more of a modern Disney vibe. It had to be colourful, feel like that modern phone game, that sort of style. Lots of purple. Lots and lots of purple. That's what they wanted to do. And that was politically motivated. It wasn't a stylistic choice that they thought it was better. They just wanted to do the exact opposite of what the average gamer wanted. That's how these decisions end up being made. And it's not like they're sitting around a board game saying all this. It's just the culture. That is what happens when you hire all of the Twitter weirdos. Over time, you create this culture, which is just a pack of morons who don't know what they're doing. They hate their audience, and they don't even really like gaming. They're just there because no one else will have them, basically. So you got the style, and it's the same for the writing and the types of quests you're putting in the game. There's toxic positivity, which is kind of a political thing with these people, where it's like, to criticize an idea someone has is a sign of supremacy of some sort, and those are the old days, and we can't have that, no. Everyone's ideas are valid, we're all part of the team. It's just that kind of thought process. We know how this goes with these sorts of people. So it's that as well. So bad ideas never get challenged or shot down because that goes against their political beliefs, basically. So this is crazy, obviously. Someone should call it out, but David Gator can't because he shares all the same views. And to acknowledge the truth that Bioware has been ruined, that Dragon Age has been ruined by this clown world thinking, would basically shatter his own worldview. That's why they point to all these other things. And we saw this with Concord. We've seen it with a lot of these lame products where it's the same old story. You and I know why these games failed. It was a mixture of everything. The look, the feel, the gameplay itself just sucks because there's no passion, because you're thinking about other things. You're thinking real world problems are more important than this game, so we need to shove all that together and mix it all together because we need to spread a message. That's what they've been doing. It's led to failures, but they can't acknowledge and actually really self-reflect as to why. It just never happens. They will make up anything, they'll point to anyone or anything at all to sidestep that problem. That their whole culture that they've come up with, that they've invented and been a part of for so long, these gamers and video game journalists and so on, it's rotten, it doesn't work. But they can't say that because then they've got nothing. Basically, it's their whole identity now. So they're just coping, basically. That's where they are. And he goes on to say, that meant that Gator's views were often not very welcome, despite his long tenure at the studio and work on many of its most famous RPGs. I actually wonder if there's actual honesty here, if it was these conversations were about combat, or if Gator and his team would go to EA and say things like this. Like, I think that the next Dragon Age game, no, we don't want it to focus on the cool stuff, what gamers, RPG fans are actually looking for. We want it to star a non-binary cast member, and we think this will be incredibly progressive. We think this is going to change the world. And then EA said, you know what? That idea is just not good. That sucks. We don't want that. Go back to the drawing board, think of something else. And that's how he's come up with that his ideas were not very welcome. Maybe it was actually just common sense in some cases. But again, I'm sure all that's true about the combat stuff as well. That is partly because, he says, EA didn't think the traditional RPG audience was the one that was actually worth focusing on. He claims that the overseers referred to those mechanics as being in the cave. The cave, he explains, was where nerds went. The nerds were in the cave. You made an RPG, and the nerds in the cave would always show up for an RPG because it was an RPG. So basically saying, if you make a Dragon Age game, then everyone who is a fan of Dragon Age is just going to buy it no matter what it is. So why would you cater to them? You might as well make something almost different because you'll bring in new people. Plus you'll have the Dragon Age fans. Double the money. This'll work, surely. That devotion to their chosen genre, in EA's eyes, meant that you didn't have to worry about the nerds. So because of Bioware's reputation, it's alright, we've already got these people's money just about. You release something, your name on the box. Guaranteed money from these nerds. You didn't have to try and appeal to them. You had to worry about the people who weren't in the cave, which was the audience we actually wanted, which was much larger. So obviously this mindset does not work at all, because what has really happened in the gaming industry, as we've seen, is if you make an incredible game in your genre, in your chosen genre that you're good at, whether it's RPGs or whether it's action games of some sort, it's fighting games, point-and-click adventures, it could be anything at all, and you do an incredible job. What really happens, what we've really seen in the last few years, is if you make a game in a genre that you're really good at as a studio, whether it's a shooter, whether it's an RPG or something else, like Baldur's Gate 3 or something, if you get it spot on, and so good that everyone's talking about it, all the fans of that genre are talking about how it's the best thing ever, other people from outside the cave, as they say, people who wouldn't normally delve into these types of maybe niche games, they get intrigued because they think, wow, I haven't tried one of those types of games before. People are saying that is the best one. Do not miss out. Play this. Be part of what's happening. Do you want to miss out on that and miss out on the hype and everything? Come on, play this. This is the time. That's like the marketing being done for them, and people buy and people play because they want to be part of that. If you just make a game that, A, pisses off the fans, well, we see that starts with a lot of negativity, blowing up online, people laughing at it, pointing, this sucks, who wants to be seen playing this? And then it just inevitably flops. There's no world where someone who plays Fortnite sees the Veilguard and think, that kind of looks like Fortnite, it's got the same vibe, it's got the same tone. I mean, everyone online is saying it sucks. I can't find anyone who likes this, but I'm gonna stop playing Fortnite and check that out because it looks similar and there's a few things sort of catering to me, maybe. That doesn't happen. That person is not getting pulled away from Fortnite to try something new unless something is happening. There's excitement, there's hype around something, like you have to play this. That doesn't happen when you try and be everything, but you're a masters of nothing. You excel at nothing, which is the case of the Veilguard and many similar games like that. It doesn't work. You have to do what you were good at extremely well to bring other people in. And sure, there's genres like point-and-click adventures, which I enjoy, where it doesn't matter how good it is, that's never going to happen. But it does for RPGs. We've seen it. So Bioware failed there. EA failed there, if that was their mindset. But again, Bioware kind of pointing the finger, because if they actually did the Veilguard well and its story, its tone, and pulled people in that way, I think it would have overcome some gameplay problems if some of those were influenced by EA in earlier years. So they do have themselves to blame. Really, Gator clarifies, that was the audience that EA wanted, and it basically got what it wanted. Unfortunately for the publisher, the endpoint of that philosophy was Anthem, a live service effort that flopped entirely at launch and was entirely abandoned within 2 years. Again, this is blaming EA, and they might take some blame, but Bioware really should be looking at themselves here, because most of what went wrong with Anthem was on them. They borderline were scamming EA in that they did nothing. They twiddled their thumbs for like 4 years, spending money on development, whatever they were doing in their little circles, whinging about real-life politics, not developing the game, who knows. And then they had no game. For like a year until it was meant to come out, they had nothing. They scraped something together very, very quickly. I think the only mechanic that impressed anyone was the flying. And that was the game. No content, nothing interesting. It was generic. There was no passion because they were rushing to the finish line. And that was the end result. Now, it's probably in dispute whether Bioware themselves wanted to make a live service. I've seen a lot of people say that, and I've seen a lot of claims that that was the case. Bioware wanted to do it. It wasn't EA forcing it on them. They wanted to do it. But even if that was true, even if it was EA saying you need to make a multiplayer game, that doesn't excuse Bioware for doing no work for years, and then the game releasing and there being zero reason to play it. It wasn't purely that they sucked at live service, they just didn't do any work. They didn't seem to care about it and were just taking the piss. So you can't really blame EA there, can you? You didn't even try, you did nothing, and that was the end result. A nothing game that people abandoned very quickly and probably destroyed your reputation, really. That was on you. The benefit of what was that Bioware was able to refocus somewhat around its single-player RPGs with last year's The Veilguard and the eventual release of Mass Effect 5, although with that game still in pre-production as of this year, it might be some time before we get to see it. I don't know if we'll ever see it. Surely they're going to be canned long before that comes out, or if it happens, there's no reason it's going to be any different to The Veilguard. It's seemingly the same sorts of people, same morons who bought us The Veilguard and have done nothing positive in years. I don't think anyone's excited. There's a few copers on Reddit and so on, maybe we can have a look at that, but that is really it. People in reality, even the people who got excited about The Veilguard, they've given up for the most part as well. No one cares anymore. And there was also Andromeda. I know it was a slightly different studio, a B team. That sucked as well, and it sucked in every way. It was like the animations were laughable, the writing was stupid, the whole follow-on from the Mass Effect trilogy, they got nothing right at all. So that was another Bioware game that has just tanked their entire reputation. So seeing this, trying to blame EA now all these years later, like the time to point the finger at EA was like 10 years ago, maybe around the time of Anthem or something while it was in development. Maybe they would have got sympathy then. After the release of The Veilguard, no one is buying it. Like I said, there's a handful of people. I found some people on Reddit living totally outside reality, saying things like, the truth is that he's purposely sidestepping the real issue. EA, they're a terrible, shareholder-focused business with despicable moral principles. Aloof leadership, they're completely unaware of the value proposition they're supposed to bring. All that can be totally true. It doesn't change the fact that Bioware are just completely incompetent. They can't make a good game. I don't think that they even want to at this point. It seems the people there are so corrupted and they're so invested with online politics, everything they read, fear-mongering, so they've got to push it all into their games and just totally destroy them. There can't be any escape because their message is just too important. We have to hear it. So that goes on, and you still have people who are defending them. Another way of saying is that EA enshitify every fucking thing these sons of bitches touch. No, because the Star Wars Jedi series is actually pretty good. I mentioned some problems with Survivor's PC port, but at least the content is decent. It was the same for the earlier game. There have been some okay EA games, acceptable games. They might have been worse off because of EA, but they weren't just utter irredeemable trash that has no redeeming qualities like The Veilguard. That is because of the developers. Stop coping. This is embarrassing. It shouldn't have been that difficult. EA acquires Bioware. They should have just let Bioware be Bioware and use their strength as a large corporation to provide extra funding to Bioware to make their games better, rather than interfere with the direction of Bioware's franchises, which they just weren't familiar with. But alas, they kinda did. They, to some extent, did allow Bioware to do what they want with The Veilguard. There might have been early on meddling, but they did have years to do what they wanted with the story, the characters, how they were going to really tackle this franchise that had been laying dormant for some time. There were so many different directions they could have gone in. They went in the worst possible one. Almost any other studio, I think, in the world would have done a better job with the Dragon Age franchise. That isn't really on EA. At least there is some truth spoken. At least someone here says, I think Bioware is in part responsible for their downfall as well. This person even seems to have some support. He's not getting just downvoted to oblivion, disagreed with. So if even these people are starting to see the truth, it's not looking very good for Bioware. The excuse making is not going to work anymore. You've totally failed in every possible way. We'll leave it there. Thanks for listening. See you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.